my name is Eva and welcome to this channel. Today we are going to be talking about studying sex. That's right, I am starting my master's in September, which is in a couple days, and I am studying sexuality. I put out a call on Twitter. If you do not follow me on Twitter, you should do that, asking for your questions, and I'm going to be answering a couple of them today, so let's do it. Just a couple things before we get started. I am a very small sex researcher. I know that I'm going to look back on the answers that I had to these questions in 4 months, in a year, and be like, she didn't know anything about what sex research was actually like. I am hoping to continue on with my master's and my PhD and become a prof and all of those things. So this is the information I can give you now, and I hope it's interesting, but I definitely don't have all the answers. So the first question is, what is the focus of my research, or like what category of sex research am I doing? And I am studying the social psychology of sexuality, and that means that I'm looking at kind of the big psychological phenomenon that govern our brains and our interactions with each other with regards to sexuality. So the research that I'm working with, she's the head of our lab group. She does research on a whole bunch of different things: sexual desire, faking orgasms, condom use, sexuality in long-term relationships. So I don't know what I'm doing my thesis on yet, but those are some of the topics that I might be able to explore. Question number 2, what is a milestone you want to achieve in your graduate studies? I have so many goals, but some of the immediate ones is I would love to be able to publish my thesis in a real scientific journal, and I would also really like to get funding from one of the big funding agencies in Canada. I have applied 2 times, one for like a summer funding and then one for funding for my master's this year, and I'm gonna try again, and hopefully that is a thing. So the next question, somebody asked me whether I'm interested in studying kink or BDSM, and the answer is yes, so much so. I think it is so interesting. It's definitely pretty complicated. It's a relatively new field of research, especially for people who are respecting those communities instead of looking at it either as like a mental illness or very much like othering the kink community. But there's a lot of really cool research going on. I'll link some below. Dr. Ruth, they're looking at how practicing BDSM is related to mental health and body image, and potentially how it can help your mental health and body image, which is so cool. The next question is, what do you think are the biggest obstacles for studying sexuality or in the sex research community in general? Funding, stigma, and so funding and stigma are connected. In Canada, a lot of the funding for research comes from the government, which is super amazing, and there should just always be more money for research. Like, convincing the government to fund especially pleasure-based research can be really difficult because of the stigma that does exist. My main beliefs about sex research is that it's so important because sexuality is a part of the majority of our lives, and we have been having reproductive parts and sexual behavior for as long as we have existed as human beings, and we know far too little for that truth. For example, someone researching a very specific plant, that plant does have its impacts in the world, and it's super important to research about it, but it's not going to be a vital part of your experience. But sexuality is a vital part of almost everybody's experiences. It impacts our wellness, our lives, our interactions, and I wish that funding agencies would understand this and the world would understand this in general, and it wouldn't be so stigmatized. The last question is, do you have a favorite study or studies? And I'm going to be sharing one with you today, which I actually included in my thesis research, which has a cheeky name, which, you know, benefits of studying sexuality. You get to name your paper kind of fun things. And it is called By the Semi-Mystical Appearance of a Condom, and it talks about how men and women in heterosexual situations communicate consent. And how it worked was that they gave students descriptions of an interaction, and the students were asked to rate how much they interpret their consent to be given, and then how much, if they were in that situation, how much consent they would be giving. So for example, someone in the situation says, hey, should I grab a condom? You would say, oh, okay, like that would communicate definitely like 5 out of 5 consent for me. And when I read that situation, I would say that that's about 4 out of 5, giving pretty strong consent. And they also rated how much they themselves use that particular method of giving consent. And the results of the study found that people of all genders are more comfortable with and use the most indirect and nonverbal consent cues, like asking, should I grab a condom, or just taking off your shirt. And that is terrifying because it's really hard to understand consent cues if you're doing things non-verbally and indirectly. So it's cool that this study kind of gives us a rundown of at least 20 years ago, what were some trends in communicating consent. I think it's important because if we know that, then that can inform kind of our consent education. However, it is important to note that you have to also address the patriarchy and rape culture in your consent education for it to actually work, because those things exist, and that's a big reason that we have such high rates of sexual assault. But I think it's super cool, and I think it would be awesome if somebody did that research again, because I would hope that now we have like a more open discourse about consent and communication in the media, and better sex ed than we did 20 years ago. That's all for today. Thank you so much for sending in your questions. If you don't follow me on Twitter @SexEdOntario, you should definitely do that, because if I ever do another Q&A, you can send in questions that way. Also, if you don't know, I have a Patreon. A Patreon means that you can pledge as little as $1 a month to supporting me, and you get really rad pledges like having a Google Hangout session where you just talk about sexuality and sex education. You can ask me more questions about what I'm doing with my life. But yeah, so those pledges help me keep making videos. Leave a comment if you have other questions about my masters, and I can try and reply to them there. Subscribe if you aren't already, and have a lovely day. So if someone wants to pay me to do that study, I'll do it. I'll do it.